A mimic? A couple of years ago, during the height of COVID, I experienced something I still can't explain. It was late at night, and I was on a Zoom call with my then boyfriend watching a movie together. I was using my Mac desktop, which was positioned parallel to my room door, so anyone entering the room would be visible on the screen. At some point, my mum came to the door. When she saw I was on a call, she stepped back out, motioning for me to mute and turn off my camera. I told my boyfriend to give me a moment, then muted and turned off my camera as she asked. She came into my room and walked over to me. We talked for a bit. She shared her plans for the next day, told me about a dream she had, and wished me good night. The whole conversation lasted about 20 minutes. After she left, I noticed something odd. I didn't hear the sound of the downstairs door closing, which was strange because she always headed to the den after saying good night. That's where she would watch TV until she fell asleep. I brushed it off and continued watching the movie. About 10 minutes later, she came back into my room. This time, she motioned again for me to mute and turn off my camera. I was a little annoyed but complied. She then started telling me everything she had just told me, the plans, the dream, the good night, all of it, word for word. Confused, I interrupted her and said, "You already told me all of this earlier." She stopped and stared at me, equally confused, and insisted she hadn't. She explained that she had just woken up from a nap and came to talk to me. At this point, I was spooked. I unmuted my mic and turned my camera back on, asking my boyfriend if he had noticed anything unusual during the first interaction. He said no. He only saw me mute and turn off my camera, but he hadn't seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. When I explained what had happened to my mom, she was terrified. She couldn't understand how I knew every detail of what she was about to tell me, down to the dream she had. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. My mom had a similar experience before. One night she thought I had come downstairs to check on her. She said she heard my footsteps and even heard me talking, but I never appeared around the corner, which was strange because I'd never stopped short of greeting her. After a brief conversation with what she assumed was me, she heard the footsteps retreat, but never go back upstairs. Confused but too tired to question it further, she went to bed. The next morning she asked me what I wanted when I came downstairs. I had no idea what she was talking about. I told her I had gone to bed long before that happened. She didn't believe me at first until I showed her the goodnight text I had sent her earlier in the evening, a message she had somehow missed. I used to think people were over-anxious about dangerous cities in Denmark, until this. Back in early 2022, just after New Year's, my family was visiting a family who were friends of ours. I had heard some bad things about the city they lived in, but I never thought much of stuff like that because I'd never experienced anything dangerous, and their street was safe. I get along well with the eldest son of the family. We've known each other since we were little and were having fun. I was a bit more degenerate and experimental back then, and young, so he talked me into sucking deodorant. It's stupid and dangerous, and the high lasts only a few seconds. For those unfamiliar, you put some fabric over a deodorant spray as a filter and suck the gas through it. I still have the sensation burnt into my memory. Wet fabric, tasting slightly like soap and chemicals, and stinging my tongue and lips a bit. We'd gone through a can or two and wanted to try some more and get some snacks, but it was late, so we had to go to a petrol station. We went outside and told our parents we were going for a walk. I put on my new winter coat, which was fluffy and fully reflective. The outside was purely a bright, reflective material, the exact opposite of camouflage. We got to the petrol station all right and both noticed this weird red car outside the petrol station as we entered, but I personally didn't think that much of it. I've always found it's best not to show any fear and act completely unbothered, to keep weird people from noticing you. It's a mental game. We went in, and they didn't have any deodorant, which we suspected before going, but it was our only option, and we thought it'd be fun to go for a walk anyways. My friend still wanted something to eat, so he got some warm food. But before that, he pointed out that the car we saw was now right outside the entrance exit of the petrol station kiosk, and that there were multiple sketchy guys sitting in it. I started getting anxious now and mentally prepared myself, but kept my composure. They were there for way too long to be doing anything normal. They were waiting for us. We got ready to leave. We only had one option: walk past them, fast. We didn't know if they noticed us looking at them, but they likely did. We exited and my friend walked much faster than me and passed them. But as I passed them, they told me that there was a guy in the car who knew my friend and he wanted to say hi. I played along and said, "Hey, he says he knows you." A part of me actually bought into it TBH. Maybe the part of me that was trying to cope with the situation. But I find that playing along and acting normally when people try tricking you exposes their deception. For example, my friend reacted perfectly. He acknowledged what I said, turned around slightly while walking, waved to the car while saying hi, and continued walking, which made it hard for them to have any excuse to not let us keep walking. There's no need to get right close to them just to say hi. As soon as they realised we weren't going to walk up to their car, they started it and left. They must have seen us coming because they drove out of the petrol station, turned left and then drove down the road we came from and blocked the entrance to the path we came from. This put a chill down my spine, as it confirmed the only reason they were there was for us, but also that they weren't done. They lingered for a bit, but maybe they realised we wouldn't be stupid enough to walk into their trap. So they slowly drove a bit further down the road. But we weren't stupid enough to fall for that trap either. I did slightly hope they had given up and realised their plan was stupid because I thought that if I were a criminal, I wouldn't do things how they did. But I didn't even really know what their intentions were. Were they going to rob us from in their car? That seemed like a self-limiting method to me. But I didn't dare think they'd kidnap us or anything like that, and didn't see why they'd want to target us for both of those things. Murder for fun? I don't know. My friend told me that as soon as they were out of sight, we would run to the left along some buildings. It's his town, and he knows his way around. It's hard to describe the layout, but the road that leads to the path we came from swings to the left, behind some buildings, and we were on the opposite side of those buildings, and could use them as cover. At this point I thought, shit, my coat is the most reflective piece of clothing in the world, and it's not exactly the best thing in this situation, to say the least. So I took it off and tied the sleeves around my waist, with the inside facing out, which is black, to be more stealthy. But parts of the outside of the coat were still visible. The adrenaline kicked in and we ran for a while along those houses. You could say that we did get high, just not off of deodorant. It was absolutely nerve-wracking not knowing what they wanted or where they were. I imagined them being around any and every corner. Eventually we reached the end of the row of houses, which wasn't too far but felt like miles. There were 2 main roads that crossed here, and I felt fairly confident that the men didn't know where we were. Who knows how many were in that car? My friend pointed to a little path which ran along the right side of the road, which was to our right. I could taste safety again. The path was a lot lower than the road, and there was a slope connecting the side of the road to the side of the path with some bushes on it. It felt safe. At the end of the path, there was a tunnel, and that tunnel, though it was dirty and dark, seemed more appealing than it ever could otherwise at that moment. It represented safety. We started walking and talking more casually, but were still a little cautious. My friend told me that when we went through the tunnel, we'd come to his street and then we'd just have to walk the distance back to his house. But as we were halfway along the path, we saw headlights approaching on the road, which was to the left of and above us. Out of reflex, I crouched down and leant onto the steep slope, which had damp grass on it, and hid behind the bush, and my friend did the same. I honestly thought this was just a random car, and that we were being overcautious. But I'm glad we did it because the car drove suspiciously slowly, and it felt like ages before it passed us. In hindsight, what other car would even be out there at that time of night? It ended up turning left down the road we came from. It was them, probably completing their circle and going back to the petrol station to find some new victims. Imagine what losers you have to be to spend your time waiting at a petrol station for possible victims. Whether they saw us or not, I don't know, but they had no chance of getting to us. We started sprinting again towards the tunnel. It was a short journey through it, and we were finally on his street. Relief. Then we slowed down again and started walking. You'd think this was the end of it, and we did so too. But as we had gotten a bit down the street, which went down a big hill and led out of the town, we heard a loud bang like a gunshot, and we started sprinting once again, another adrenaline high. It wasn't right near us, but it sounded like it came from the petrol station we had come from, or at least that direction, which wasn't that far away. I think anything could have made us run at that point, though, even the sound of a sweet old lady offering us cookies. That would have been a bit creepy in this context too, though, LOL. We reached his house, went up to his room and agreed not to tell anyone. We debated whether the bang we heard was a gunshot or not. It was near New Year, so it's not unlikely that it was a firework. But the weird thing was that we only heard that single bang the whole time. I'd never heard a gunshot before, so I didn't have any reference, but I still remember thinking it was a bit too loud for a firework. This remains the most dangerous experience I've ever had, which I feel quite privileged about because I wouldn't say it's the worst experience to have had of the sort. But it could have been a lot worse than it ended up being. This is how I met my twin brother. Some of you may have told someone in your life that you've met either your soulmate, your best friend, or your business partner in the weirdest way possible. Prior to the meeting, you'd never have guessed that you'd encounter them in such a strange way, let alone imagine they'd end up staying in your life for so long, if not forever. I have a story that's much, much weirder than any of yours. This is how I met my twin brother. Met? You might be asking. You're a twin. You don't just meet each other like a friend or a spouse. You grew up together, starting from the womb. Or so many people have told me, more times than I can count. This story happened 57 years ago. I didn't remember how I got there, racing down an empty road in a stolen floating car, running from a group of people. Strangely, I didn't even remember how I ended up being chased. The people pursuing me looked like military personnel, police, or something of the sort. I turned my head to look at the man driving the car I was in. I didn't remember who he was. All I knew was that I'd been running from those people with him. There wasn't anything particularly special about his appearance. The only thing that stood out was his birthmark, 3 black moles lined up under his left eye. I don't understand, I said to him as he gripped the wheel. The more time I spend running, the more I lose my memory of what I've been through here. Same here, he replied. This city is strange. I can't tell why or how. I don't even remember why I'm running from them. But from experience, a group of people chasing me never means anything good. So I guess running is the best option for now, he explained. I don't remember who you are either, or how we ended up running from them together. No offence, he added as he sped the car faster. I didn't respond. I looked around. How did I end up here? The city looked futuristic, with no moon or stars in sight. It was as though it was perpetually nighttime, lit by the glow of high-rise buildings and dazzling city lights. Beautiful on one side, but hollow and lonely too. I glanced back and saw the group chasing us drawing closer. "Stop them! Don't let them reach the portal!" shouted one man who seemed to be their leader. "Portal," I muttered, turning my head forward. Ahead of us was a massive, skyscraper-tall circular structure. Its centre glowed with a blue, watery surface. The portal. "Dude, there's a dead end!" I shouted in panic. "No, there's a portal!" the man driving replied. "There's hope." "What? But we don't know where the portal leads," I warned him. "Maybe, but I can predict where staying here leads, and I'm not going there," he said, accelerating further. Amid the fear and panic, I scanned the city. Other portals stood scattered among the buildings, but the one ahead was directly at the end of our road. "Don't pass through the portal," the leader of our pursuers yelled from behind. My companion and I exchanged a glance. Did we have any other choice? "You don't understand," the leader screamed. "It's not your time yet. You haven't undergone the procedure. You'll remember everything." What was so terrible about remembering everything, I thought. That portal in front of you is the final gate to reincarnation. Throughout the history of humankind, there have been countless times when two strangers, never knowing each other in their previous lives, jumped through that portal together, yes. But they all did so under strict procedure. None of them was still in a condition where the memories of their previous lives remained intact. We heard the man preaching the weirdest sermon we had ever encountered in our lives, but I keep racing along in the same floating car with the man beside me, whom I, once again, didn't remember ever seeing before. "No, don't! Don't pass through the portal together!" His voice was much louder now, genuinely filled with urgency and fear. We hesitated, but we didn't have much time to debate. We sped forward and plunged through the portal. Crossing it felt like passing through a wall of water. Then everything turned white. When I regained my sight, I found myself staring at a ceiling. I was in a room. As my vision sharpened, I saw the face of a man leaning over me. He looked massive, like a giant, and wore a surgical mask, his eyes filled with shock and concern. I tried to raise my hand but froze in horror. My hand was tiny and fragile, like a baby's. Before I could process what was happening, the man spoke. "Ma'am, it turns out your baby is a conjoined twin. We need to take them to the observation room immediately." He handed me over to a woman in a nurse's uniform. Wait, what did he just say? A baby? It turns out. Conjoined twins. Panic surged through me as I turned my head. And there it was. Another head, attached to the same body as mine. The face on the other head stared back at me, its eyes wide with the same horror I felt. Then I saw it. 3 black moles lined up under his left eye. Next story. Never follow Google Maps at night with your data off. It was supposed to be a simple drive. Maya and I were heading out to our friend Eric's farmhouse for a party, excited to leave the city behind for a night. The roads out here cut through endless grazing lands, wide open fields dotted with the occasional tree or fence. Google Maps had the route loaded, and though my phone's data had cut out a while back, I figured we'd be fine. I was wrong. The first sign that something was off came when the moon rose. At first it was nothing unusual, a pale orb peeking over the horizon. But as we drove deeper into the countryside, it seemed wrong. It was too big, too low, and its light wasn't soft or silver. It bathed the fields in a strange, faint crimson, as though the world had been dipped in blood. Maya stared out her window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Does the sky look brighter to you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I glanced up. The stars were there, but they were dim, swallowed by that unearthly red glow. "Yeah. Weird, huh?" I tried to sound nonchalant, but my grip on the wheel tightened. We passed through stretches of farmland, endless and desolate. The fence posts seemed taller, sharper, their wood blackened like they'd been scorched. The fields themselves were empty, no cows, no movement, just long, brittle grass swaying under the breeze. I hadn't seen another car for miles. And then we saw them. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Dotted along the fields were figures, vague and shadowy, standing far from the road, too far to make out any details. They weren't moving, just standing there, like statues carved from the night itself. "Maya," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you seeing this?" She turned to me, her face pale. The shadows?" "Yeah. I thought I was imagining it." As we drove on, the silhouettes didn't disappear. They multiplied. Figures appeared every few hundred feet, standing just at the edge of the fields, always facing the road. Their forms were human but wrong. Limbs too long, heads slightly tilted, unmoving yet somehow impossibly alive. "Maybe they're just scarecrows," I muttered, though I didn't believe it. "They're not scarecrows," Maya whispered. Her breath fogged the window as she pressed closer, trying to get a better look. The road stretched endlessly before us, narrowing as trees began to creep closer on either side. The moon's red glow turned the landscape into a surreal, hellish painting. And the figures, they were getting closer. At first they stayed in the fields. Then they began appearing near the fences, their black forms clearer now. No faces, no features, just hollow outlines that seemed to drink in the moonlight. I sped up, the tyres crunching over gravel, but they didn't fall behind. They started walking. "Maya, they're moving!" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. She turned back and her scream filled the car. The figures were stepping out of the fields now, their movements jerky and unnatural. They didn't run, but covered ground impossibly fast, their silhouettes growing larger and clearer with every second. The air inside the car felt suffocating, heavy with something I couldn't name. I pressed the gas harder, the engine roaring as we hurtled down the road. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the edges of the world seemed to blur, like reality itself was unravelling. "No houses," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "No signs. Where are we?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The road twisted and turned, but it never seemed to end. The figures were on the road now, closing in on either side. One stepped directly into the beam of the headlights. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless head atop a too thin body, its long arms hanging at its sides. It didn't flinch as we sped toward it. I swerved, the tyres skidding as Maya screamed. We narrowly missed it, and as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw more of them stepping onto the road. And then, just when I thought we were out of options, my phone buzzed. "Signal!" I shouted, grabbing it with one hand. The map refreshed, the screen flickering before a new route appeared. "Turn left," the robotic voice instructed, calm and detached. I yanked the wheel, the car bumping onto a narrow dirt path. The figures were everywhere now, their hands reaching for the car, fingers scraping the windows. Maya was sobbing, her head buried in her hands. The car lurched forward, tyres kicking up dirt. The silhouettes receded into the red haze, their forms shrinking, disappearing. And then they were gone. The road ahead was paved again, lit by the faint glow of distant farmhouse lights. The moon was white, small and harmless. The air felt lighter, cleaner. Maya lifted her head, her face streaked with tears. What the hell just happened? I didn't have an answer. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel, driving straight past Eric's farmhouse. Whatever that place was, it wasn't on any map, and I wasn't about to find out how close we'd come to staying there. The Hollow Man. I grew up in a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other. Our house was on the edge of the woods, and I'd always been warned not to wander too far in. My mother said the woods were old and carried the weight of things we couldn't understand. I thought she was being dramatic until the night I met the Hollow Man. It was the summer after I turned 15. The air was thick with heat and I couldn't sleep. My window was open to catch the breeze, but instead I caught the sound of something strange, a faint hollow knocking. It wasn't on the door or the walls, but deep, like it was coming from under the floorboards. I crept downstairs, thinking it might be the house settling. But as I reached the bottom step, I saw the front door was wide open. My parents were asleep and we always locked it. Goosebumps prickled my skin. I closed it and bolted it shut. As I turned to head back to bed, I froze. In the moonlight streaming through the window, I saw him, a tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the woods. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and had long, gangly limbs that didn't seem quite human. His face was missing. Just smooth, pale skin where features should have been. My breath hitched. He raised an impossibly long arm and pointed at me, his hand like a broken branch. I don't remember running upstairs, but I remember locking my bedroom door and pressing myself against it, shaking. The knocking came back, louder this time, echoing from everywhere. I covered my ears, but it didn't stop. The next morning, I told my mom what happened. She went pale and told me about the Hollow Man, an old legend in our town. He comes for those who wander too close to the woods or for those who see him. If he's marked you, she said, he won't stop until he gets you. The next few nights were worse, scratching at the windows, whispering that sounded like wind but formed my name. I started seeing him in the shadows, closer each time. On the 5th night, I woke up to find him standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. He leaned down, his blank face inches from mine, and I swear I felt him smile. The next morning, I packed a bag and left town. I thought distance would keep him away. It didn't. Years later, I still see him, in reflections, in dreams, in the corner of my eye. He's always watching, always waiting. The Hollow Man doesn't forget, and one day I know he'll take me. The scent of earth. It started with the smell, wet earth like freshly turned soil. I just moved into a house built in the 1920s, a fixer-upper that came with a lot of quirks. The basement was one of them. It was unfinished, with dirt floors and walls that seemed to sweat even in the dry months. The realtor called it rustic charm. I called it unsettling. One night while unpacking, I noticed the smell for the first time. Strong and damp, like the basement had been freshly dug. I figured it was just the natural scent of the place and went back to sorting through boxes. A few days later, I noticed something strange. Every time I went into the basement, I felt like someone was watching me. It wasn't loud or obvious, just a subtle prickling on the back of my neck. I chalked it up to nerves and the dim lighting. Then the noises started. It was faint at first, a soft shuffling, like fabric being dragged across the ground. At night, when everything else was quiet, I could hear it from upstairs. I convinced myself it was just the house settling. But then, one night, I heard a whisper. It came from the basement door as I passed by it, a single raspy word I couldn't quite make out. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. Slowly, I opened the door and peered into the darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. Nothing, just the scent of earth, stronger than ever. I told myself it was my imagination and shut the door, locking it for good measure. But the whispering didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, always coming from the basement. One night I couldn't take it anymore. Armed with a flashlight and a kitchen knife, I decided to go down and face whatever was down there. The smell was overwhelming as I descended the creaky stairs. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the packed dirt floor and the old stone walls. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the basement, the earth had been disturbed. A shallow hole, freshly dug, marred the otherwise smooth floor. Inside the hole was a shape, a bundle wrapped in rotting cloth. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to go back upstairs, but something drew me closer. I knelt beside the hole, gagging at the overpowering stench. With shaking hands, I pulled at the cloth. A face stared back at me, desiccated, hollow-eyed and grinning. The whispering erupted around me, a cacophony of voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The beam swung wildly, illuminating the walls, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of faces, pressed into the dirt, their mouths moving in unison. They were buried in the walls, their bodies hidden, but their faces were alive. Watching. Waiting. I don't remember climbing the stairs, but I remember slamming the basement door and barricading it. I moved out the next day, leaving everything behind. But sometimes late at night I still hear the whispering. And I can't shake the feeling that the smell of earth is getting closer. I found a box of my things in my boyfriend's closet. I never gave them to him. It started with the sweater, a simple navy blue pullover I thought I'd lost months ago. It was folded neatly on the top shelf of my boyfriend's closet, and I only noticed it because I was hunting for a blanket while he was in the shower. I pulled it down, frowning. "Hey, Nick!" I called out, holding it up as he came back into the room, toweling his hair. Isn't this my sweater? I thought I lost it." Nick froze for just a second, then shrugged. "Oh yeah, you left it here ages ago. I forgot to mention it." It was a reasonable explanation, but something about the way he said it didn't sit right. I didn't remember ever bringing that sweater to his place. That nagging feeling stayed with me over the next few days. It wasn't like Nick to keep secrets. We'd been dating for 2 years, and while we had our ups and downs, I trusted him. But this felt different. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I waited until Nick was out running errands, then went back to his closet. The sweater was still on the shelf, but as I scanned the other items, I noticed something odd. A plain cardboard box tucked in the corner, partially hidden by a stack of old shoes. My name was scrawled on the lid. Heart pounding, I pulled the box out and opened it. Inside was a collection of things that were unmistakably mine. A hairbrush I hadn't seen in over a year, a photo of me from high school that I'd lost when I moved out of my parents' house. A necklace my best friend gave me for my birthday, the one I thought I'd dropped somewhere in the city. My stomach turned. These weren't things I could have accidentally left behind. They were items I hadn't seen in years. Things I thought were gone forever. Then I found the notebook. It was a cheap spiral-bound journal, one I used to carry around for doodling and writing grocery lists. Flipping through the pages, my throat tightened. The handwriting wasn't mine. It was Nick's. Page after page, he'd written down details about me. Things I liked, things I didn't, places I went, people I talked to. The final pages were the worst. They weren't about me anymore. They were about us. Things I hadn't even told him. Arguments we never had. Future plans I'd never agreed to. And at the very end, scrawled in a frantic, looping hand, was a single sentence repeated over and over. "She'll understand eventually." I didn't hear Nick come back. By the time I looked up, he was standing in the doorway, staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "I told you to stay out of my closet," he said, his voice eerily calm. I tried to speak, to explain, but my words caught in my throat. Nick stepped closer, slowly closing the door behind him. "It's okay," he said softly. "Now we can finally talk about what's next."